Okay, we're back. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us. Look at that wide shot. We got Ryan and Emily here. We got counterpoints, which is in the house. Yeah, lots of headroom. If this were any other time, we would be doing a little bit of camera adjustment. But this is what it looks like when it's live. When we have a brand new, beautiful studio that you premium subs are helping us with, it will be different, we promise. Okay, so people have heard us talk a little bit now. Ryan, Emily, you guys watch the speech with us. What do you guys think? Ryan, you go first.
All right, I mean, the thing that's most important to me about this is that it is the launch of his presidential campaign.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So you're really not going to make a whole lot of policy, and you're not going to make a lot of, you're not going to move the needle on public opinion and really on the ground or in the room, except for that Medicare thing and Medicare and Social Security thing, which was absolutely remarkable. We want to talk more about that in a minute. But if this is what he's going to run on, this is kind of exciting. Like this is a party that like working people could get behind. I mean, what did he talk about? He talked about supporting organized labor, pass the PRO Act, go after big pharma. We're going to address climate change. He said we're going to cap insulin prices.
Billionaire tax.
Medicare and Social Security, billionaire tax. We're going to bust up monopolies and all the different fees. I'm going to a resort, and it's not even a resort, and I'm paying a resort fee. But
that seemed very personal.
At his friend's house
that was
for
clearly
free.
personal.
That's how I don't,
yes,
he's never encountered
and his
this tax.
friend charged him a resort fee.
Good point.
But so so you can and he's going for the identity theft and some funny stuff like that. Like people are getting to him.
Yeah.
But in general, that's a platform that people could get behind. It's strange.
It was a lot of Matt Stoller was very excited because he's talking about antitrust. What was it? First president?
The first president since 1979 to mention antitrust.
To mention antitrust. You're talking about industrial policy. You're talking about big
making
pharma,
things in America.
making things in America. And then, I mean, I'm not big on this whole squishy, like, bipartisan comedy, whatever. But there are a lot of people who are really into that. That's a very normie sentiment of, like, why can't we all just come together and get some things done? What I said earlier, Emily, and I want to get your thoughts on the whole thing, though, is I think the fact that you had this sort of ugly raucousness from the Republicans in there really did kind of play into Biden's hands of looking like the grown-up in the room.
He looked in control too. He was almost like engaging with the crowd. He let them finish. He wasn't heckling them back. He let them finish. So I think optically that's 100% correct. That did not work in the way that, let's say, Marjorie Taylor Greene or whomever else was involved in it wanted it to work. That said, to Ryan's point, and actually Kyle made this point too, he gave a speech that was so front-loaded on economics, and that's really smart. If you're Biden's speechwriters, you should be really happy with how this turned out. He's sort of checking down, going through the laundry list, and fleshing out, actually, not just listing off, but fleshing out things like infrastructure, things like the CHIPS Act. Now, to the bipartisanship point, I think that's a fascinating point because it works with people until the country stops working.
Yep.
Because he had a line earlier where he talked about basically decades of hollowing out the middle class. Who was in the Senate? Who was the senator from MasterCard with identity theft?
Yes.
For decades
I brought that up.
hollowing
I agree.
out the middle class. I mean, it's just like, so that's a real problem for Biden. And I think he has never had a real answer to confronting it head on politically.
Right.
But tacking in that direction, it's not just good news for Democrats, it's good news for the country that Republicans, at least optically, were so vehemently offended by what Joe Biden said with Social Security, Medicare, because they said, Kevin McCarthy gave his whole speech last night, it's off the table, it's off the table. That's good news for the country because it tells you where the Overton window is.
You know what's funny? I'm monitoring the professional press corps. What are they all talking about? Decorum in the House. I'm like, who cares about the decorum? Like, look, I'm not saying it isn't a thing, but Social Security, people, Medicare, that is going to define the next couple of months of our politics. It's driving me nuts. And like, that was the first thing I zeroed in on. I was like, man, that's a big moment. That is going to be every ad, the Biden ad, the launch. I'm the one who protected it. I will veto the bill. Krystal picking up on the fact that Republicans are not willing to go there yet. This also puts Trump on the back foot where he's like, no, they're lying that we don't want to cut Social Security, but he doesn't have a unified coalition. I'm like, this is it. This is the whole ball game, Ryan. So what else do you want to dig into on that?
And for decades on the left, there's been this internal argument. Do you work within the Democratic Party to try to make the Democratic Party a better thing, or do you work outside it, you start a third party and try to pressure them from there? As the working class is kind of being divided by between the two parties here, a kind of new answer is emerging, which is that you actually work within both parties. And Joe Biden did that tonight. Like, I've never seen a speech like that kind of change the negotiating table, change the game in the way it did. Before this speech, Republicans had their game plan for when it came to the debt ceiling crisis. You know, they're going to hold it hostage. They're going to force Biden to the table. They're going to get some cuts, and then they're going to agree to it the same way that they jammed Biden up 10 years ago. They come out of this speech with nothing left.
Right.
Like, so what are they? Okay, well, now what are you going to do? You're not cutting military spending because you're Republicans. Right. Now you can't cut Social Security and Medicare because you just told the whole country that he's a liar and that you would never do such a thing. So you're left with the EPA and like NOAA, FAA, and the BLM.
All the woke stuff.
They can cut BLM and tell their base that it's Black Lives Matter. And actually, they can trim the Bureau of Land Management.
I was going to say, leave Clive Bundy alone, right? I'm just gonna,
He's going to fly back for that meeting and defend his budget.
Well, I do, to your point, because they obviously took great umbrage at the suggestion that they wanted to cut Social Security, Medicare.
They would never do such a thing.
They want to save it.
They want to save it.
They want to strengthen it.
Right, exactly. But I mean, the numbers just don't work out. Like, the math just doesn't work out. If you're like, I want to slash the budget by this huge amount, right, which they do and which they've said publicly, but I don't want to touch Social Security, Medicaid, like, it just literally doesn't.
Or the Pentagon.
Or the Pentagon. If you put those together, like, it's not going to work out for you. And so that's why it is a fair hit to say to them, like, no, you want to hold the debt ceiling hostage. You want to cut these programs. You have a track record of wanting to cut these programs. Senator Rick Scott said you want to cut these programs. And it was pretty remarkable to see how much they freaked out about that.
And a good sign, though, again, because this is post-Paul Ryan politics, and Republicans have realized, I mean, you can cut the entire Pentagon. This is per Brian Riedel at the Manhattan Institute. You could literally get rid of the Department of Defense, and you can't balance the entitlement balance sheet in the way that Republicans say that they want to. And there's a reckoning with that on the right now. That doesn't mean that Mitch McConnell wouldn't love to get his hands on and strengthen Social Security and Medicare. But I think it's at least sort of becoming, and again, I think this is good for the American people. You have J.D. Vance, Donald Trump coming out and saying the same thing, and setting the tone. You have Russ Vought, who's hugely influential in the new right and in Republican politics. His entire plan to balance the budget, he was OMB under Trump, is don't touch Social Security and Medicaid. You can get rid of, to the point that you guys were making, all of the woke policies. And you don't have to. You can balance the budget in 10 years without touching anything else. And just the fact that the wheels are in motion on that tells you that Republicans are like, no, we literally cannot even whisper a word about it. And if it comes out of your mouth, we are putting you in the corner.
That's a really interesting point. We got Marshall and Kyle's reaction. I was curious for your guys' reaction. So right now, Sarah Huckabee Sanders is giving her rebuttal. I don't know who's watching it, but we have an excerpt, and I think the excerpt is important more so in what's not in it and what is in it and what the case of what the potential Republican pushback against this is going to be. I'll just read this again. In the radical left's America, Washington taxes you and lights your hard-earned money on fire. You get crushed with high gas prices, empty grocery shelves. Our children are taught to hate one another on account of their race, but not to love one another or our great country. And while you reap the consequences of your failure, the Biden administration seems more interested in woke fantasies than the hard reality that Americans face every day. Most Americans simply want to live their lives in freedom and peace. We are under attack in a left-wing culture war that we didn't start, and we never wanted to fight. Emily, what did you think of the strategy there to really go hard at the culture war? And to be fair, she didn't actually watch the speech before she released that excerpt. So clearly, but I mean, that's kind of how all these things work. You get a predetermined little fact sheet and all that. What do you think of that strategy? That's
a really good study in contrasts, I think, because she expects Biden to come out, which is wrong. I mean, it's a good example of how Republicans are disconnected from the Biden that they're actually fighting, as opposed to the straw man.
Smart.
And then it's not to say that Biden isn't doing stuff in the culture war. Of course he is, sort of bureaucratically in the executive branch.
That's in the DOJ, right?
Yeah,
it's not a national name.
Right, and the education department and all of these things that people aren't necessarily able to follow on a single day-to-day basis. But that Sarah Huckabee Sanders comes out anticipating a Biden culture war speech, and what she gets is something like what Stoller points out, the first president to champion antitrust reform in a State of the Union since 1979. I haven't seen the full Sarah Huckabee Sanders speech yet, but man, is that going to miss the mark if Biden is out there talking about increasing manufacturing, increasing jobs, decreasing unemployment, and all of these economic metrics. she said the choice is between normal or crazy. This is a quote I just saw from Twitter. Republicans punching at a culture war straw man is not giving people that choice very clearly.
She's saying,
yeah.
Right. That's their problem, because Biden is the one that comes off as normal. This is.
Yeah.
And that's why Biden's strength is in some ways his weakness. He's this like centrist all white man, and it's just not going to land. You're just not going to call him a radical wokester, and have it stick.
Yeah.
Didn't it was like Jesse Waters or somebody said people just don't hate Joe Biden.
Yeah.
It's true.
It's something good for him.
So on the other hand, let's go ahead and put, what is this, B3, guys, that we could put up on the screen here from the Washington Post, where you have the latest post-ABC poll, which had a lot of bad numbers for Joe Biden, says more than 6 in 10 say the president has not accomplished much, despite, they say, the passage of numerous bills, which is true. 62% of Americans say Biden has accomplished not very much or little or nothing during his presidency. Only 36% say he's accomplished a great deal or a good amount. His approval rating is low. We showed a poll earlier that has him losing to Donald Trump. Of course, a lot of polls out there, too, having losing to Ron DeSantis. If DeSantis ends up being the nominee, you have a majority of Democrats, Ryan, who say, we don't want this guy to run again. We want someone else. So even as, I listen to that speech, and there's a lot in there that, I respond to. I think it's a good case he makes about what he's done, about what he might do going forward, laying out industrial policy, antitrust, pro-labor, et cetera. But there's a lot of signs the American people aren't really feeling that right now.
Right. The flip side of nobody hating Joe Biden is that nobody really likes him either.
Yeah.
This same
He's
poll,
just kind of
it
okay.
He exists.
7% of people who said they were excited about him.
Who's excited
all
about
work
Joe
at
Biden?
MSNBC.
7%.
Right.
It's the cast of Nicole Wallace's show.
Yes.
That's right.
The low-rated one, too. Not even the good one.
Yes.
If there is such a thing.
Yeah. So
I don't know.
Yeah. Nobody's excited about him, but that's not how you govern anymore in America, and it's not necessarily how you win elections.
Yeah.
Like Hillary Clinton's problem was she had this small group that was really excited about her, but in general, people weren't excited about it. They thought she was just qualified and most qualified, et cetera. But people intensely disliked her on the other side.
Yeah.
And it became a contest, if you remember in the polling at the very end, of who was the least disliked by the American public. And Biden ended up beating Trump 4 years later because he was less disliked than Trump was disliked.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
With Trump, he has very high favorables and very high unfavorables. Nobody feels ambivalent towards Trump. Whereas with
everyone's ambivalent to Biden.
Everyone is basically ambivalent.
He's like, he's fine.
I mean, Emily, the thing I keep coming back to with Biden and his reelect is, I don't know if you remember, Ron Klain, after Emmanuel Macron won re-election in France, where his approval rating was total trash, right? It was like in the 30s. Yes. And he's able to win, and he won pretty easily over Marine Le Pen because people really hated her a lot. And so, Ron Klain tweets this out and is like, oh, interesting. He won re-election with a 36% approval rating or whatever. I mean, that kind of seems like the path that they are hoping for Biden. And so that's why you see, not only in this speech, he really did front load with what he's done and what he wants to do and where we are, et cetera, on the economy. But there's also quite a bit in there, which obviously Republicans got upset about the Republican plans and why they were the wrong direction. So, I mean, in some ways, I think his reelect hinges on how much people dislike the Republicans, how extreme they are, and how much they want to avoid going in that direction again.
Right, and that's why it totally depends on the nominee. We've seen that show up in polling, but it's a really important point because I think American politics is lurching towards that reality for the foreseeable future, period, where you have people with really low approval ratings, maybe even low favorability ratings that are just able to muster the right, cobble together the right coalition and just scrape past or get to that 50% mark or 49, whatever it is. And that's the reality I think we're facing in the country, that we're too divided to have, I think, like Ronald Reagan's reelection, where he's just trouncing absolutely everybody. That's just not going to happen. Or Bill Clinton. I mean, we're not in that world anymore. And so Republicans, I think, need to realize that if they want to create this dichotomy of normal versus crazy, they need to figure out how to make that stick to Joe Biden.
They need to not be the
and
crazy.
not be crazy.
Well,
right.
you have to do both.
Don't do the Cruella de Vil thing and stand up and yell.
It's a tough one. I really don't know how they get their way out of it, because it's like I can make the case on either side. Like if I'm Ron DeSantis, look, okay, let's say Trump, we had a fun debate at our live show. What happens if Trump and DeSantis both die? But what's more likely? Let's say Trump.
What's wrong with you guys?
It was a fun, honestly, it was a fun segment. I swear.
Trump and DeSantis thing so many times. We're like,
Right.
all right.
We're like, what if they both, what if they both,
Said they both get arrested.
my scenario was that they were both on Air Force One and Air Force One crashed.
Marshall
like, on
had
their
a
way
good
to
one.
Florida.
They blow up the Chinese balloon
Yeah,
over
and then it
Florida,
falls on-
and the
Yeah.
debris takes them both out.
No,
Anyway.
DeSantis arrested for grooming.
Yeah, Santos.
and then Trump-
Actually, no, George Santos killed them both. Okay, so
Move on.
part of what we got
Too much Diet Coke.
from that, part of what we got from that dialogue was that they need to try and reconcile the craziness of Trump and the energy of that with the fact that they still won 6% of the national popular vote during the midterms. Like, this can be done. Joe Biden is weak. We have all of the polling data to show that. It is Trump and that wing which is dragging them down electorally. However, they hold so much power institutionally. Go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, no, I think that's 100% true. And
Yeah.
Biden is picking up on this with his own party in a way that Republicans who have seen the culture war sort of path to victory in a Virginia or a Florida, you cannot just translate that to Sarah Huckabee Sanders going all in and having absolutely no answer to Biden's very sort of like normie, aimed square at the middle economic speech. That's like a kitchen table, real person speech. You can't just come out swinging with that kind of stuff. And Biden, for instance, he didn't say much, as you guys pointed out earlier, on abortion. He didn't say much about the border. He didn't say much about LGBTQ issues. He said we had one mention of of transgender young people.
Right.
But the bulk of the speech was on the economy. He didn't even talk about Ukraine that much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was at the bottom third.
Yeah, we
I
noted
was
that
shocked
as
by it.
well.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think Democrats have realized, probably picked up on the number from the midterms, which the midterm narrative was one thing, but it is true. Republicans did have a decent night, not nearly what it was projected to be, but they did okay in the popular vote. So if Democrats see that, they do have a lot of culture war problems. There's just no question about it. You did a great podcast this week on Deconstructed where you sort of talked through some of this. They do have those issues, but Republicans can't fight them in a way that handicaps themselves going into those battles.
Biden doesn't give them a lot of ammunition, and I'm not aware of a national election that has ever been won on the question of what local schools should be teaching or not teaching.
That is our destiny, though, to have presidential elections hinge on who gets to play on the lacrosse team. Like that will be like eventually where this system is heading. I don't know if it'll be this one or 4 years from now, but it's part of the process of just removing more and more decision making away from elections, but you still have to give people something to fight over.
Right. Yeah.
But speaking of not having anything to fight over, it's like the Democratic Party seems like they don't have the civil war that they had over the last kind of 6, 7, 8 years. It was basically won by the establishment, with Biden finally beating Bernie, but they also absorbed a decent amount of what Bernie was fighting for, and so that's why you see so much frustration on the outside that Bernie's not fighting more. That Bernie's become a big supporter of Joe Biden, because Bernie, as budget chairman, writing the reconciliation package. He's seeing trillions of dollars of spending go through. You're seeing unemployment knocked down to what, 3.4%, lowest since like 1969.
Yes. Right.
And so you have this. He talked about the nearly $400 billion in climate spending, and so
he called himself a capitalist.
Yes, right, exactly. So they kind of ended this civil war by A, beating Bernie, but then B, bringing in a decent amount of what he was fighting for, just enough to kind of keep them happy together. And because Democratic voters are so fired up about electability and beating the evil Republicans, they're going to keep putting forward people like Biden, probably. Whereas Republicans still are, fired by the culture war issues, and because I think they were told that Trump was unelectable. They said, screw it, we don't care. We're electing him anyway. We're nominating him anyway. And he won. They don't want to hear about electability crap anymore from people.
And they're not going to want to hear that for a long time. Go ahead, Krystal.
Emily, what do you see as the contours of the coming Republican? I mean, the Republican Civil War is sort of upon us. People are kind of choosing their sides and the battle lines are breaking down. But Are there economic issues that are involved in that Republican Civil War? Is it primarily around culture war issues? Clearly, Ron DeSantis is positioning himself as like I was during COVID, I was the guy who was open for business. Donald Trump was shutting things down. Whether the facts of that, whatever, that's how he's positioning himself. Is that going to be the key dividing line? How do you see this playing out?
So it looks like Nikki Haley is going to announce formally and do a rollout next week. And that's already what I've seen some on the kind of new right talking about is like, what an embarrassment that this is just a Tea Party ghost who has not updated herself whatsoever. But then the question is, what is the substantial difference between Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley? Because with Donald Trump, we know to some extent that it's just a mixed bag. It's the same thing with his foreign policy. You're going to get some new, some shocking new, and some of the old stuff. It depends on who wins the fight at any given moment, the tug of war at any given moment. But how substantially different is Ron DeSantis or Glenn Youngkin, Mr. P.E. Patagonia vest, going to be on that issue? And I think that's a really open question, and the primaries are going to be a place where that's sorted out because Republicans do face pressure now after Donald Trump, this is post-Paul Ryan era, not to do things to Social Security and Medicare. Like, this is a huge source of pressure on Republicans. So I think a lot of it will be hashed out in the midterms. I think it's completely up in the air now. I think anybody who says the Republican Party has been, permanently changed for good and turned into the party of the working class is absolutely wrong. That's not to say there isn't some reason for
optimism.
It's possible.
Right.
And by the way,
it's like
Stoller talks about this. Like, this is good for everybody. The Republican Party is never going to be a beautiful, wonderful, pure party of the working class. It's not going to happen. The Democratic Party is not going to be either. One might be better than the other. But the Republican Party at least being dragged, kicking and screaming to say things like, if we're going to balance the budget, we're not going to do it from stealing and raiding from your entitlement funds. That's a good day for everyone. But the question is still open.
I mean, I see that and I don't, because at the end of the day, the McCarthy holdouts also begged and demanded a vote for the frickin' fair tax, which is,
get rid of the
terrible,
IRS.
terrible, regressive, total Tea Party throwback stuff. And the whole contours of the debt ceiling fight, outside of them just not publicly wanting to be accused of cutting Social Security and Medicare, this is Tea Party 2.0 stuff. I mean, this is all Tea Party tactics. Their asks are Tea Party asks. So it's, when I look at something like that, I'm like, does it really change? Is it really different? Because now that Trump is sort of less clearly in command too, a lot of their talking points and their economic policy has just floated right back to that Mitt Romney, Paul Ryan era, ultimately. And I mean, it's Trump himself, his biggest accomplishment was a gigantic corporate tax cut that they all are perfectly happy with.
Well, and the other thing, and you'll definitely have thoughts on this, but antitrust is a huge, and I'm actually very curious if Sarah Huckabee Sanders had a word about antitrust, because Republicans have actually made significant motions. Some of the most powerful antitrust suits have been filed by people like Ken Paxton in Texas, and the Trump administration against Google. There's some real meat on the bones. That's like one of the areas where there is actually truly a realignment, to borrow a word from Saagar and Marshall, that you can see happening. And who is Ron DeSantis, is Sarah Huckabee Sanders, is Nikki Haley? What are they going to say about that? How would they govern? That's a completely...
Well, Nikki Haley is already
on record.
We know where
Nikki would be.
She's already on record against what is it?
And she's taking her lane out on that.
Now is not the time to rethink capitalism, is what she famously said in her speech. So good luck, Nikki. I'm going to enjoy watching you fail. I really will. I could say that as the Indian American who doesn't want to see you be the first one on the stage for all of us. But Ryan, I'm curious here also on the Democratic side. So at the end of the day, the laundry list of here's what I want and all of this, it's not going to happen. This was all just oppositional. So to that extent, Biden, we were talking about, this is the kickoff of his campaign. It seems like it did a pretty good job. Like, overall, this is probably as good as you could probably hope for. And he didn't step into any of the pitfalls. I saw that he's on his way to Wisconsin and Florida. In Florida, I'd just be like, give up, Mr. President.
Right.
Like, that ship sailed, sir. Yeah. Wisconsin, that's a smart move. But yeah, like going into those two states in the next couple of days, like this is probably going to be a pretty high point for him. And especially coming off the midterms.
Right, there were two paths he could have taken when Republicans said, we're going to hold the debt ceiling hostage to force demands. He could have taken the last Joe Biden approach, which was great. We all need to get together. We'll do a commission. And
Simpson Bowls.
Simpson Bowls. We'll hold hands together. I got Bruce Reed here. He was my staff guy then. He's still in the White House.
That's true. He's still there.
Dust the plans off. And yes, like people want to work longer. And
Right.
Medicare is too generous. And Medicaid, people need to be incentivized to get back to work. Like they could have been that Joe Biden.
Right.
Or it could be the Joe Biden that we saw tonight. Who's like, who baits them with the Rick Scott plan. And he could have baited them with the Kevin McCarthy plan, saying they were going to strengthen Social Security and Medicare. He gets them to call him a liar, and he says, "Oh, wait, we got a lot of converts here. I'm happy. So great. We're not." So he goes the other direction and says, "We're not going to go down that path," which means that the Biden who came out of the gate with the, he said, "Here's my offer on the American Rescue Plan, $1.9 trillion," and Susan Collins comes back. She's like, "Here's our offer, $550 billion or 600, whatever it is." 2 hours later, he puts out a statement. He's like, "We're doing this alone. We're not taking 6 months like Obama did and like allowing Susan Collins to just like dictate this to us." That was a shocking moment in like Democratic political history.
Yeah.
But
when
is
we
it
did that.
him? You know how he's been like conferring with John Meacham and trying to step into the FDR shoes, and this is like actually reported. Axios has had reports
No, you're right.
on
Yeah.
Biden like genuinely trying to rescue the soul of the nation and seeing himself as this FDR figure, not like FDR light, but like FDR next generation, truly. And he had a line in the speech where he talked about, I think it's the Inflation Reduction Act provisions of it not going into effect until January 1. So people are just starting to feel the economy heating up, and the economy is heating up in different ways. And that might explain the disconnect between the mood of the country in polling and what Biden sees as a hot economy or a heating up economy. But to that point, is it some of that seeing him slotting himself into that character, this FDR-like figure that has made him say, "I'm not the old Joe Biden, screw it, we're not waiting for Susan Collins." But at the same time, he did say Republican friends over and over again in that speech.
Yep.
Notice that?
I mean, this is in particular a real break from the old Joe Biden. Here's the line from the speech. "If anyone tries to cut Social Security, I will stop them. If anyone tries to cut Medicare, I will stop them. I will not allow them to be taken away, not today, not tomorrow, not ever." Now, he doesn't say in there not yesterday because he's tried multiple times in the past.
For 40 years, I tried to cut Social Security. But if you try
Today,
it,
no,
Trust
not
me.
tomorrow, not ever.
We'll take what we
in
can
the
get,
future.
folks.
Yes. So
God love you.
yeah, I mean, listen, I don't want to oversell it because, on the other hand, went out of his way to like bust the potential rail strike and hand power to the bosses there. Like, hasn't fought for lifting the minimum wage. Mentioned the PRO Act here, that fell off the table. Didn't really put the screws to Manchin and Sinema over Build Back Better. And so, we were all happy when we got something in the Inflation Reduction Act, but it's easy to forget how much the actual original vision was trimmed by a lack of willingness to play hardball and a willingness to like just accept the rulings of the parliamentarian and things like that. So I don't want to oversell it here, but I do think there are some noteworthy shifts in terms of, even just industrial policy and antitrust. These were like antitrust. The Obama administration was terrible on antitrust. Terrible. Allowed some of these gigantic mergers to go through that now people are raging about, right? The Ticketmaster being a primary example there. And so industrial policy was basically a dirty word in both parties for my entire life until now.
Up until literally, I think 3 years ago.
Yes.
Really,
You were a
really when
communist.
Biden
You were
put
a
out.
communist.
Yes,
Do you remember when
exactly.
Biden put out, what was it? His like Made in America plan? I praised it on Rising and here. I was like, hey, listen, that's pretty good. I was like, you can say whatever, I was like, by the way, I was like, Jared, please release the Made in America thing from the National Security Council, which I know that you held up for 2 years and then didn't end up passing for literally no reason. So in a lot of ways for Trump, this is dangerous territory. Biden is taking the two most singular popular things that he did, which was China and it was Made in America. Look at that, the way that he talked about China in the speech. And
Although
then
not
also,
much.
No, he didn't talk about it much, but look, he did not say that, 7 years ago?
Right.
What he was trying to say in that whole switch places with I speak Bidenese, is because I used to watch him whenever he was coherent, And he would always talk about how he was one of those people. He was so pro-engagement with China. He often says this, I'm the only person, I've spent more hours with Xi Jinping than any other Western leader in the world. I've sat there and I've talked with him across the table. That was his big selling point.
He was so excited he even brought his son.
Yeah, actually, there was a lot of business dealings going on. That was side,
the big guy.
all on Air Force Two. Another story for another day, of which we have covered several times. But the point is that he has gone from engagement to confrontation. Clearly, that is, without Trump, that doesn't happen. And he's also now gone completely with Made in America, the full embrace of all of that. I do want to know who he is. He goes, many people don't like when I say this, but we're going to buy American. I'm like, who is saying that?
Right,
like,
exactly.
Outside of like JP Morgan CEO, who is saying that? I'm like, I like that. Most people like that.
Larry Summers.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Got some flap at the country club.
All right.
One last thought, and then I want to hear you guys' final thoughts as well. But one thing we talked about going into this, which maybe it shouldn't matter, maybe it should matter. I think it's reasonable for people to have concerns about a man who would be 86 by the end of a next term. And so as much as the New York Times was running a story that I know was planted by Biden aides about how he's preparing to overcome his stutter in this speech, sort of trying to set the bar low, that if it doesn't go well, don't be an asshole. It's because he has a stutter. It's not because he's old, guys. Don't say that. But ultimately, he's still Joe Biden at 80 years old. It's still not what he used to be. It wasn't like an incredibly masterful oratory. But Ryan, I think, in terms of what he's capable of, this was a pretty well-delivered speech. And as Emily was saying, being able to do a little give and take with the audience, that's not easy to do. So I think also he did himself some favors in terms of persuading people that this is a man who is still capable of conducting the business of the presidency, and that we're not all going to be left in the hands of Kamala Harris, dear God.
I think we're also starting to all grade him on a curve relative to what we expect from him. Like, I think he has successfully set the bar really low for his public performances. Right. Every time he tried to go off the teleprompter, off script with a little riff, you're almost holding your breath for him.
You tense up.
Yeah, outside of the Medicare thing, they were all bad.
All bad.
Every single one.
Even his start. He starts out by saying, I get to be here because Jill's going to the game tomorrow. And
what are you talking about?
Like, are you talking about the Super Bowl and the Eagles?
It's like, what? That's
He's
Sunday,
very
man.
excited to see how Donovan McNabb performs.
Right.
Yes.
What? Like,
Nice reference.
He should have finished with a Go Birds at the end.
Yeah.
Because he's not winning Missouri.
That's true.
Dr. Oz, what a Dr. He's saying fly, Eagles fly, Ross.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was good.
Well, on that point, and he did seem to get Tyree Nichols' name wrong. It wasn't
Called him Tyler.
Like
Wasn't great.
Yeah.
Sounded like Tyler. Yeah, it wasn't a perfect performance, but I do think that because the bar is so low for him, every time he clears it and looks like he can give a normal presidential speech for an hour, again, because the bar is so low. And part of that, by the way, is because Donald Trump was the preceding president.
Yep, that's a good point.
And Donald Trump's State of the Unions tended to be pretty boilerplate and conventional. That wasn't true of the rest of his communications. So Joe Biden being able to just give a speech for an hour, talk about his Republican friends, and make America at least sort of be back in the political theater that people are comfortable with, I guess that's a win for him.
Yeah. All right. Okay, guys, thank you so much for your analysis. I hope everybody enjoyed this stream. Thank you so much also to our premium members who help support the show and keep all of these things going. They are expensive to put on, so we really much appreciate you. And we love you all. We're going to have some content for you guys tomorrow. Hint, it involves a congressman attacking Krystal Ball, my partner over here, and Joe Rogan as a vicious attack, calling them anti-Semitic. We will get into all of that tomorrow. We'll have a full show for everybody on Thursday. Lots of great content in the interim, and we will see you all later.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.